Welcome, everyone. I'm Catherine Lavender, the Data Project Manager for NACDA, and this is our NACDA Data on Aging podcast series. NACDA is the National Archive of Computerized Data on Aging at ICPR at the University of Michigan and is funded by the National Institute on Aging. NACDA's mission is to advance research on aging by helping researchers to share and discover a broad range of data sets for secondary analysis. NACDA acquires and preserves data relevant to gerontological research, kind of like a data library, curating the data as needed to promote effective research use, and disseminates the data to the research community free of charge. By preserving and making available the largest library of electronic data on aging in the United States, NACDA offers opportunities for secondary analysis on major issues of scientific and policy relevance. The focus of this podcast series is to connect with the gerontological research community. We will highlight data resources, researchers, and principal investigators in order to talk through data concerns as well as learn the stories behind these projects. So today's podcast features Dr. Brady West, and we're going to talk a little bit about the Network for Innovative Methods in Longitudinal Aging Studies. Dr. Brady West is research professor at the Survey Research Center located within the Institute for Social Research here at U of M on the Ann Arbor campus. And he earned his PhD from the Michigan Program in Survey and Data Science and is currently focused on survey methodology, survey statistics, applied statistics. So I've got quite the list here of things you're currently working on. Methods for the design and analysis of longitudinal studies, collecting data using web and mail from national samples, data collection methodology for the health and retirement study, responsive and adaptive survey design, modular survey data collection using smartphones, analytic tools for information adaptive inventions, methods for secondary analysis of linked data sets, and methods for quantifying selection bias in surveys. That's quite the list, yes, impressive list. And you're the author of a book comparing different statistical software packages in terms of their mixed effects modeling procedures, linear mixed models, a practical guide using statistical software. So welcome, Brady, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Yep.
Just in mind with your book, I want to ask right away, do you have a favorite stats package or order of preference?
Wow, that's $1 million question. Well, I mean, first of all, before I answer that, thanks, Catherine, for inviting me to the podcast. I really happy to be here and chat about this new network. Wow, that's a question that I often ask in classes to our students. Boy, I guess if somebody had a gun to my head and said, choose your best statistical software package or it's all over, I'd probably say Stata. I've been using Stata for a really long time, and I approach that really from an analysis perspective because I work on a lot of secondary analysis projects. So I think Stata has really made it really easy for data users to do a lot of very cool stuff. Very easy to use software, but also enables a lot of high level stuff, especially in terms of modeling and working with survey data. And it integrates everything, pretty easy to use graphical procedures, easy to write code. Again, high powered, very fast, works on, multi-core processing systems pretty easily. So I think, overall, I'd say Stata. I really like SAS for managing huge data sets, and I really like R for writing original software, original programs, new functions. So, but I think all things considered, just given the type of work that I do, I'm a huge fan of Stata. So.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. I like Stata too. I like how straightforward some of the language is with the syntax. Yeah,
for sure.
Cool. Okay, so we're going to jump into our normal questions here.
Sure.
Could you talk a bit about how you got involved with your research and with the network, the longitudinal network?
Yeah, so a lot of the work that I do as an applied statistician, survey methodologist, has to do with working with longitudinal data or working with panel survey data. A lot of the major projects here in the Survey Research Center revolve around panel studies, longstanding panel studies, and I have a lot of colleagues who are working on these studies. We've contributed experiments to a lot of these studies, and it's clear that there's a lot of methodological development that's still needed for panel surveys and panel studies, even though they've been around for such a long time. So, we in the survey methodology program where I work here within the Survey Research Center, we've collaborated a lot with senior leadership on these different studies, like the health and retirement study, panel study of income dynamics. And some of our senior colleagues brought to our attention, and by our, I say Sung-Hee Lee, who's another colleague here, associate professor in our program, they brought to our attention this call for proposals for developing a research network that would be focused on new and developing methodology for longitudinal studies of aging. And Sung-Hee and I conferred, and we talked to our senior colleagues. This was Vicki Friedman in particular from the Survey Research Center. They thought that we would be good candidates to lead the project, but of course they needed somebody to write the proposal to NIH as well. And it sounded to us like a very exciting opportunity. We could develop this network, get a lot of people together who are all working on the same problems, work on developing this new methodology, put on workshops, put on plenary meetings, really get a community of like-minded people together to do good work in this important area. So Sung-Hee and I both jumped on it. We started working on the proposal, and long story short, we got a lot of help and insight on the proposal, and the proposal ended up receiving a good score, and NIA ultimately decided to support it. So we're really happy to receive that kind of support from NIA, and we actually just had our first workshop for the network yesterday, and it was very well received. We've already been recruiting members and putting together working groups related to the network, and our first workshop yesterday was how to apply weights when analyzing longitudinal survey data. My colleague Yajwan C within the program did a great job, had a good turnout. So really excited about kind of kicking things off in that regard, and hoping to plan many more workshops just like that. So that's how this all came about. And we're really excited about the potential of this network to generate a lot of good things for these longitudinal studies of aging. So.
That's wonderful. Yes, very important work. And yeah, from our experience, NIA is very supportive of any resources that make it easier for secondary data users to use longitudinal or panel studies. We've noticed just over the years that there's a really high demand and a need based on that demand for that work, for sure. And I'm glad the workshop went well. If there are any resources you'd like us to share from that, please send them my way.
Yeah, actually, all of our workshops, we have a website. It's NIMLAS is the name for our network. It's nimlas.isr.umich.edu. All of the materials from the NIMLAS workshops, including the video recordings, will be posted and freely available online. So from yesterday's workshop, we have code, we have data, we have the slides. All of that's posted on the NIMLAS website for people to take a look at. And we just posted the Zoom recording of the hybrid format workshop yesterday. So it's all there. So
excellent.
We're just trying to get the word out. And that's why we're thankful that NIA would support this, because I think it's going to be a really good vehicle for making a lot of really cool methodological stuff available to a pretty broad community internationally. So, but yeah, all the workshops will have that stuff up on the website.
That's great. Thank you. We'll definitely share that.
Sure. Yep.
From the NACDA site.
Yep.
Okay, so you talked a little bit about this already, but is there anything else you'd like to say about the central objectives of NIMLAS, and if you just want to elaborate any more on that?
Oh, sure. Yeah. With NIMLAS, we're really aiming to bring researchers together from all over the world. Again, we really have an international focus because there are longitudinal studies of aging going on all over the world, and we want to bring these researchers together who are all working on methods for how to improve the design and the analysis of these longitudinal studies of aging. So it's not just about how to work with the data. It's when you're actually sitting down to design or help to maintain a longitudinal study of aging, what are the best data collection methodologies to use? What's the best technology to use? How do you get people to consent to additional forms of data collection? How do you curb attrition in these kinds of longitudinal studies of aging? Our goal is really to, get this like-minded community together and get everybody thinking about, where methodological work is needed and what new developments are out there. I help to lead these kinds of methodological efforts on the health and retirement study. So that's a great example of one of these longitudinal studies of aging. But there's a lot more work going on in this area. And our goal was really to create a diverse and active network of researchers who are working on these important problems. And I think thus far we're off to a pretty good start, but I'm really excited to see where this goes over the next 5 years or so.
Thank you. That's great. How often do you expect that there will be workshops? I'm just curious. I was just thinking about this.
We're hoping for 3 to 4 workshops a year. I mean, that was our objective in the proposal. And again, these are going to be free workshops, so no cost. They'll be in a hybrid format, so people can attend remotely or they can attend in person if there happens to be a presenter here at ISR. But that's our goal, and we'd like NIMLAS members to contribute workshop proposals. We may hunt some people down and ask if they want to present something. But all these workshops are really going to be designed to present kind of what we know about the state of the art in a particular area of design or analysis as it concerns these longitudinal studies of aging. So, over the life of the project, so that amounts to about 20 workshops ideally. So
that's great.
But we just have to see, what kind of proposals come in and who's willing to present and things like that. But we're very open to ideas for workshops in this area, and it could be on any aspect of, again, design or analysis of these types of studies. So
that's exciting. So would you like to talk a little bit about the major findings so far? I noticed there are some 4, research areas, the 4 thematic research areas from the NIMLAS site. So yeah, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, so again, we're just getting started, but we have our first major working group meetings coming up. So as you mentioned, there are these 4 primary thematic areas of research that the network's going to focus on. One is the creation of more data on minority populations in these longitudinal studies of aging, where there's a notable weakness in terms of the lack of data on important minority populations. A second is on design and analysis methods for dealing with attrition. A third is the use of new technologies to collect data, technologies that will be well received by aging populations. And then a fourth is methods for improving rates of consent to additional data collection or linkage of study data to additional data sources like administrative data or collection of biological data, all this really cool stuff that we would like to try to connect to survey responses, trying to get people to consent to that process. So when people join NIMLAS, they can join one of these 4 major working groups in these 4 thematic areas. They can join multiple groups if they want to. And we're scheduling our first major working group meetings right now. As I mentioned, we already had this workshop yesterday on state-of-the-art methods for weighting of longitudinal studies, and that material is now up on the website. For those people who go to our website, you'll see that for each of the thematic areas, we're preparing a bibliography. And for that bibliography, our aim is to summarize the major findings from each of the studies that are emerging in that particular area, including studies that have already been performed. And then we have a graduate student, Nia Holland, who's helping us to write concise summaries of the major findings of each of those studies so that we can have kind of a one-stop shop for people who want to try to go to these bibliographies and summarize what's really going on in one of these particular areas. So that's all going to be part of our bibliography and putting these studies together in an organized fashion on the NIMLAS website. So hopefully that people will find that as a nice feature of the website. And as people in the network continue to do research, we also have a call for pilot projects that's out right now. And we received a number of pilot project proposals. That's going to be another major activity of the network, is funding pilot projects, probably 3 to 4 each study year, where they'll receive a substantial amount of money to cover direct costs of research, methodological research. And anything that comes from these pilot projects that'll be funded by the network, that information will certainly get promoted on the website as well. So our aim is not only to bring together discussions of this, but really to also generate new research with the funding that we have to support these kinds of pilot projects. And all of the results from this work, including work prepared by other research organizations and work coming from our own pilot projects, all of that's going to be documented and organized on the NIMLAS website under each of these areas. So major findings from those pilot projects will be a key focus of what we're disseminating via the website and via our various meetings. So
That's great.
Yep.
We're huge fans of bibliographies and related publications, as you probably know,
Yep.
here at NACDA and ICPSR. So we definitely applaud that work and look forward to seeing the site get filled up. It sounds so busy, but it sounds like it's going to be great.
Yeah, I mean, fun fact, ICPSR is where that was my first job in any kind of data.
What?
I mean, when I was a sophomore at Michigan, I just saw a flyer for a request for a research assistant working with Janet Vavra, who was over in the Borders building at the time. And my first job working in data was to ship paper code books to people and help to write SAS code that would help people read in data sets. So that's where I first learned how to use SAS, and I first learned about the importance of good code books and helping out data users. So that was my very first job in any kind of research or data. So
that is a fun fact. We love hearing about people's experiences with ICPSR, and I love hearing about the old Borders building in particular. For those of you who don't know, Borders was a bookstore, and we used to be in that building, and then Borders was there, and then they closed. But yeah, that's really cool. So would you like to talk a little bit about some of the challenges of the research process from your perspective? And if there are challenges of this network that you also want to talk about, you're welcome to. But we like to ask researchers because we think it's important, particularly for new researchers to kind of, understand that anything they're struggling with, somebody else has struggled with, and there are resources out there that can help. So.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, right now, when I look across all of the different projects that I'm working on, including NIMLAS, the major challenge that keeps coming up over and over is data access. So I'm a big fan of ICPSR for a number of reasons, but mainly because ICPSR makes life much easier with regard to making data available and data access. But I'm working on some projects right now that require access to restricted data. So, it might require physically going to a research data center here at ISR, or, going through a data user agreement and establishing an agreement with multiple different organizations. I worry that although many agencies and institutes are currently touting this idea of open science, in many ways, it's become harder and harder than ever to actually access data sets and do some real work with microdata. And these are even for studies where the study leaders claim that the data sets have been de-identified. You still have to go through a pretty extensive data user agreement process to even have access to the de-identified data, because there might be some sensitive measures in there or whatever the case may be. I fully understand why restricting access to certain types of data sets with sensitive information is important, obviously, but I worry that some agencies have in some ways become a bit too restrictive. And ultimately, this is serving as a major barrier to getting good research out there. It's making it harder for research teams who are trying to make use of data that have been collected using substantial federal resources. It's making it harder for people to actually produce meaningful research using those federal resources. I'm working on a project in the RDC right now where we're trying to apply a new methodology. Again, the focus of NIMLAS, developing methodology. We're trying to apply a new statistical methodology to a data set that took years to create and merge and merge from different sources of administrative data and so forth. And they were looking at an important relationship of interest. And we're trying to see if we can come up with a better estimate of that relationship given the process that went into creating that data set. So in truth, we don't know anything about the process of creating that data set over the course of 2 years. We're just coming in and we were given the opportunity to reanalyze it and conduct a secondary analysis. And we're literally just generating 3 estimates of a regression coefficient based on our new methodology. And just to be able to get those 3 estimates out of the RDC, I basically have to fill out a 9-page form talking about where every single variable that went into the model, even the variables that we aren't interested in, where it came from, how the data were merged, sample sizes for each of the variables, descriptive statistics. when all we really care about is those 3 coefficients in a secondary analysis. So what that means is that the person trying to export these simple estimates, which would not allow anybody to identify anything about anything in the data, requires the researcher who's doing the analysis to spend who knows how many hours writing answers to these questions just to get the estimates, let alone write about them in any kind of paper.
Wow.
And again, I get it, but to me, that's more of an obstacle to performing research than it is to enabling research. So this is my personal view on things, but having been through this multiple times now, I feel like some places are just going a little bit in the extreme direction in terms of trying to protect data. Again, it's clearly important, but in some cases, things are a little bit out of control. And I think that's the biggest challenge if I think across all my projects right now that I've been running into, so.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that example. Yeah, I know what you mean. I think that it's sometimes there's a lack of resources, and so an organization might feel compelled to put a blanket approach to data that's de-identified, and data that might be have sensitive information or disclosive information, and you need a different approach for different types of data, and
Yeah,
it can be hard to devote resources to that. Further, it sounds like there might even be extra time once the data is analyzed to review the output and make sure that it adheres to rules. So there's the timeline for some of the restricted data access can, like you said, be a challenge and sometimes a barrier for researchers.
Sure.
Yeah. What do you have any thoughts on the new census approach to data suppression?
Yeah, I guess this is related to what I was just getting at. Personally, I think this is an example of kind of going overkill in the opposite direction, and I worry in that the effects of these types of efforts to develop synthetic data or to perturb data or suppress data, whatever techniques are ultimately used in this world of kind of differential privacy. I worry that the effects of that on microdata and on subpopulations that people might be interested in can be pretty substantial, because a lot of these methods, they rely on models for perturbing data and adding a certain amount of noise, and those models are obviously subjective, right? It depends on the people who are working on processing the data, what models they use to add error or whatever the case may be. And it's impossible for any one team working at a federal agency to project every possible analysis that a data user might be interested in. But that's essentially what's happening, is that they're using a model that assumes they know, what the relationships between different variables are and what subpopulations people are going to be looking at when they try to perturb the data. And I worry that it does a little bit more harm than good. When there's a lot of data perturbation, and I don't know. I guess in summary, like, I'm not the biggest fan of those ideas, and I think there are other ways that can be done without making significant changes to microdata that might ultimately affect subpopulations, small areas that many researchers might be interested in, but are not essentially covered by the model that was used to perturb the data. So you end up getting nonsensical counts and frequencies within certain small areas.
Yeah.
And it's all because it was part of a larger process that didn't recognize the fact that certain researchers are interested in these smaller subpopulations, and the people perturbing the data they can't account for all of that with these different approaches. So I think there are better ways to go about perturbing data, de-identifying data, things of that sort that are not going to have such a significant effect on the microdata. And again, I worry it's part of this being overly restrictive about sharing of data, and I worry that that's doing more harm than good in terms of the overall process. So I know a lot of people are researching this, a lot of people are working on it. Again, I get it. I understand differential privacy is very important, but I worry about, again, going too far in an extreme direction that ultimately affects studies of interest, especially for subpopulations. So.
Thank you. That makes sense. I know what you mean. And I think anybody who's worked with a variety of data sources would understand and for the most part agree. We need more researchers, we need more data management experts, we need more people learning about data confidentiality and making recommendations. And so,
Yeah, I mean,
we'll see where it goes.
I guess my thing would be, I for a long time, I've just wanted to see a nice, clear report that makes the risk clear that everybody's worried about. The risk of identifying a person in a survey or identifying an establishment. Like, I want to see a report providing a concrete example of average Joe internet snooper, going in, finding a person, identifying that person, doing something malicious. I just think that, the risk of doing that is significantly overstated right now. And so, with the amount of resources going into, this kind of work, I feel like the evidence of risk is not supporting the amount of concern and hand wringing about this, if that makes sense. So in my view, that's what I would dedicate resources to, is showing that, yes, this is a significant risk, that, somebody without an incredible amount of technical skill and background could I easily identify somebody in one of these data sets. I have yet to see a good story talking about that. So.
Yeah, Brady, this is Jim McNally. And, on that, we had a program project, oh God, a decade or more ago, which looked at those issues. And in fact, Brago did some intruder models and with HRS and a couple of studies. And his final opinion was that the risk, you needed to use scientific notation to quantify the risk. And the real risk, Eleanor Singer did, came at it from a different perspective. And what she found was just the implication of disclosure reduced response rates by a tremendous amount.
Oh, yeah. Yep. So
while the risk was almost non-existent, the perception of risk was a huge factor. Yep. And I don't know if Raghu ever published on that, but I think he may have. But it was quite some time ago, back when Myron Gutman was the PI of the program project.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is increasing public awareness of really how much work goes into, confidentiality and making sure that data are protected. I think if there was more, general public awareness of the amount of resources that are dedicated to making sure that your data are protected, I think people would feel a little bit more comfortable participating in surveys and so forth. But that's another massive undertaking that a little bit challenging in these political times. But I think a lot of it has to do with public awareness of what exactly happens with your data when you participate in this kind of study. So Eleanor's work was very important in that regard. Yep.
Yeah, and just the transitions in how risk is evaluated. I mean, when I worked for CDC back in the 80s, and we published the names of the PSUs for like the health interview survey. We physically named them, and a little bit before I joined, the interviewer would assign race based on visual observation to the respondent. They didn't even ask, and we move forward. But as you say, we've added additional barriers. Now, the mortality detail files, you have to go through a whole process just to get below national level geography, where for 60 years, you could go down to at least to the county level. Right. And that's had a very negative impact on using the mortality files for research.
Right.
Thank you both. That was really interesting and important. I think that, it's clear that we need more, networks like NIMLAS. We need more, meetings and just people involved who are experts in these areas to speak to this. Like you said, Brady, a report would be great, just to kind of really clarify the risk associated with identifying respondents for the average person. Yeah,
I'd love to see it.
Well, fingers crossed. Sometime in the next few years, somebody will invest in that. So, what advice would you give to those trying to use the resources offered by NIMLAS or anyone trying to work with longitudinal aging research?
Definitely just join the network. I mean, there's no, it's not a challenge to join the network. You can just sign up online at the website. Join the network, become involved in the activities, join one or more working groups that are going to be part of the network. Offer to provide or even receive consulting. So part of the activities will be provision of consulting by experts on the network to outside researchers who may have questions about, for example, using weights in longitudinal analysis, or how to design a mixed mode study or something like that. We hope to provide free consulting on that. So I mean, that's a free service that'll be provided by the network as well. And network members are certainly willing to sign up for being consultants. We've indicated that we will compensate network members who provide consulting to other network members as a part of our regular activities. So this is all part of the NIA funding package to really provide these kinds of resources to the broader community working on these problems. Individuals could offer to put on or take one of our workshops. As I mentioned earlier, anyone can submit a pilot project proposal. So we start with pre-proposals, and then after having experts review those, we invite people to submit full proposals for funding as part of this pilot project program. So we have funding available for these pilot projects. We're going to be offering many different chances to get involved and meet people, and again, work with collaborators and colleagues who are working on similar problems in the design and analysis of longitudinal studies of aging. And we really hope that researchers are going to take advantage of all these opportunities, so that NIA has invested a significant amount of resources in this new project, and we really want researchers to take advantage of the resources that the network is providing. So just get involved. There's no hassle, there's no harm. Anyone can sign up to be part of the network, and we're trying to make that process as simplistic as possible. So no reason not to get involved.
Thank you. Yeah, I think NIA really wants to see the research that they fund be used more broadly. And this is exciting that this network is worldwide too. I mean, we've interviewed, you're our 10th interview, and every different researcher we've talked to has mentioned how important it is to network, and not just within your immediate circles. And so I think this is a great opportunity to do that. And yeah, we're really looking forward to seeing, what great things come from this. And
thanks. Yeah.
We normally ask this. Obviously, NIMLAS is what you would recommend to sign up first, but I just want to ask, are there any conferences or meetings that you recommend people think about participating in or attending outside of the longitudinal network that, this NIMLAS? It's often people recommend like GSA or something like that, but yeah.
Yeah. So Gerontological Society of America is a good one, but in my experience, a lot of what's presented there is more substantive in nature. For people who are really interested in new methodology, like for data collection, for study design, for analytic techniques, conferences more in my neck of the woods, if you will. So like, the American Association for Public Opinion Research, or APOR. We put on a conference where there are a number of methodological presentations related to data collection and analysis every year. So there's an annual conference in APOR, and people can certainly sign up to be members of APOR to learn more about new methodologies and data collection techniques. There are also many regional chapters of APOR that people can sign up for. For example, we were telling our PhD students today that they should be signing up for MAPOR, which is the Midwest Association for Public Opinion Research, which is a regional chapter here that I'm also part of, which, like the national APOR, has an annual conference and regular events related to data collection methodology, research and polling, and longitudinal studies and things of that sort. So those are two really good annual conferences that people should consider who are interested in this kind of methodology. Also, just more generally, like the American Statistical Association puts on a number of different meetings, the joint statistical meetings being the big one, where being a survey geek like me, I always seek out presentations about survey methodology and data collection methodology and so forth. So JSM is a really good one within ASA. And like I said, they have a number of other meetings every year, like, more on applied statistics or theoretical statistics and using software and things of that sort. So those are good conferences. And there's all kinds of little workshops on like total survey error. Like there's a non-response workshop. Some of these are international. There are little workshops that a lot of survey methodologists attend that always provide really good information about this kind of methodological development. So I'd recommend those as well. But anybody can get in touch with me with questions about any of these kinds of conferences. But there are a number of conferences that are dedicated to methodology, and I'm actually the conference chair for APOR this year. And the theme of my conference is going to be on collaboration. So I really want to recognize the importance of the work that methodologists do in collaborative science. And so I'm trying to invite people to submit joint talks to the conference this year, where there's going to be one more methodological or data collection person, but then they're going to be paired with, the substantive researcher that they're working with, so that the substantive researcher can give some background on the key substantive questions and then say how the methodological researcher has helped them out. And I'd love to hear more about kind of those joint presentations at the APOR conference this year, just to see how we're really impacting, a number of different fields with the methodological work that we're doing. So that's my theme that, that I wanted to organize for this year. And I'm excited about that. But more generally, APOR, MAPOR, ASA, those are all good organizations to join and become active in those kinds of conferences where you'll learn a lot more about methodology if that's what you're interested in. So.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, last question. What excites you about being a researcher now?
Yeah, I mean, this is an exciting time for working with all kinds of data. I love working on methodology to improve the quality of data collected, thinking about new ideas for how to approach data analysis. This is why survey methodology and data science is such a fun area to work in. I mean, there's never a shortage of exciting and new challenges in trying to learn about larger populations, trying to collect data from larger populations, trying to make sense of those data. It's a lot of fun to work in this kind of research and collaborate with people who are doing really interesting stuff and trying to improve society, and just, lending technical skills to those kinds of investigations. So I like the diversity. I always have liked the diversity of the projects that I work on, and the different collaborators that I work with, and trying to get new approaches out there. That's what kind of drives me. I'm also really thankful for the opportunity to just work on this network in general with Sung-Hee. Esther Friedman is a co-I. She's one of the associate directors of the panel study of income dynamics. So she's on our kind of leadership team. And as I mentioned earlier, our PhD student, Nia Holland, she's been helping us out a whole lot. I got a great technical support team here that's been helping us with our website, and that's really cool that we don't have to worry too much about making our website really easy to use. And every day we're seeing nice developments up there, so I'm really thankful for them. I think we have a great team, and I'm just really excited to see what we can do and what we can produce with NIMLAS. But more generally, it's just such an exciting time to work with data. And I mean, a longer term career goal is just to improve awareness in society of the importance of well-designed scientific data collections, and why it's valuable to participate in these kinds of studies, so that we can learn more about the society that we live in. So that's always been kind of a longer term goal, but that's that would take a couple of lifetimes to really, I think, make some good progress on. But I want to do what I can while I'm around. So
it definitely sounds like you're doing what you can. I think this network sounds exciting, and we thank you so much for talking with us today.
Oh yeah,
and
my pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you so much to our guest and to our listeners for joining us on this podcast. You can find links to studies we referenced by viewing the description and content below. If you have questions or ideas, please email us at icpsr-nacda@umich.edu.